Historical background: the British come to India in 1608 as a trader in the form of East India Company, which had the exclusive right of trading in India under a Charter Act guaranteed by Queen Elizabeth in 1600. In 1765, the company, which till now had purely trading functions obtained by the Diwani, that is, right over the revenue and civil services of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa. This started its career as a territorial power. In 1858, in the wake of the Sepoy Mutiny, the British Crown assumed direct responsibility for the governments of India. This rule continued until India was guaranteed independence on the 15th August 1947. With independence came the need for a constitution, and a constituent assembly was formed for this purpose in 1946, and on January 26, 1950, the constitution came into being. However, various features of the Indian constitution and polity have their roots in the British rule. There were certain events in the British rule that laid down the legal framework for the organization and the functioning of the government and administration in British India. These events have greatly influenced our constitution and polity. They are explained here in chronological order under two major headings. First, the Company Rule 1773 to 1858. Second, the Crown Rule 1858 to 1947. The Company Rule Regulating Act of 1773. This act was of great constitutional importance. A. It was the first step taken by the British government to control and regulate the affairs of the East India Company in India. B. It recognized for the first time the political and the administrative functions of the company. And C. It laid the foundation of the central administration in India. The features of this act were as follows. First, it designated the Governor of Bengal as a Governor General of Bengal and created an executive council of 4 members to assist him. The first such Governor General was Lord Byron Hastings. It made the governors of Bombay and the Madras Presidency subordinate to the Governor General of Bengal, unlike earlier when the 3 presidencies were independent of one another. Third, it provided for the establishment of a Supreme Court at Calcutta 1774, comprising 1 Chief Justice and 3 other judges. Fourth, it prohibited the servant of the company from engaging in any private trade or accepting presents or bribes from the natives. Fifth, it strengthened the control of the British government over the company by requiring the Court of Directors, governing body of the company, to report on its revenue, civil and military affairs in India. Amending Act of 1781. In a bid to rectify the defect of the Regulating Act of 1773, the British Parliament passed the Amending Act of 1781, also known as the Act of Settlement. The features of this act were as follows. First, they exempted the Governor General and Council from the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court for the act done by them in their official capacity. Similarly, it also exempted the servant of the company from the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court for their official actions. It excluded the revenue matters and the matters arising in the collection of the revenue from the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Third, it provided that the Supreme Court was have to have the jurisdiction over all the inhabitants of Calcutta. It also required the court to administer the personal law of the defendants, that is, Hindus were to be tried according to the Hindu law and Muslims were to be tried according to the Mohammedan law. Fourth, it laid down that the appeals from the provincial court could be taken to the Governor General in the Council and not to the Supreme Court. Fifth, it empowered the Governor General in the Council to frame the regulation for the provincial court and the Council. Pitt's India Act of 1784. The next important act was the Pitt's India Act of 1784. The features of this act were as follows. It distinguished between the commercial and the political function of the company. Second, it allowed the court of directors to manage the commercial affairs but created a new body called the Board of Control to manage the political affairs. Thus, it established a system of double government. Third, it empowered the Board of Control to supervise and direct all the operations of the civil and military government or the revenues of the British possessions in India. Thus, the act was significant for two reasons. First, the company's territory in India were for the first time called the British possession in India, and second, the British government was given the supreme control over the company's affairs and its administration in India. Act of 1786. In 1786, Lord Cornwallis was appointed as a Governor General of Bengal. He placed two demands to accept that post, which first, he should be given power to override the decision of his council in special cases. Second, he would also be the commander-in-chief. Accordingly, the Act of 1786 was enacted to make both the provisions. Charter Act of 1793. The features of this act were as follows. It extended the overriding power given to Lord Cornwallis over his council to all the future Governor Generals and the Governors of Presidencies. Second, it gave the Governor General more powers and control over the government of the subordinate presidencies of Bombay and Madras. Third, it extended the trade monopoly of the company in India for another period of 20 years. Fourth, it provided that the commander-in-chief was not to be a member of the Governor General's councils unless he was so appointed. Fifth, it laid down that the member of the Board of Control and their staff were henceforth to be paid out of the Indian revenue. Charter Act of 1813. The features of this act were as follows. It abolished the trade monopoly of the company in India, that Indian trade was thrown open to all the British merchants. However, it continued the monopoly of the company over the trade in tea and trade with China. Second, it asserted the sovereignty of the British Crown over the companies and territories in India. Third, it allowed the Christian missionaries to come to India for the purpose of enlightening the people. Fourth, it provided for the spread of the Western education among the inhabitants of the British territories in India. Fifth, it authorized the local government in India to impose the taxes on persons. They could also punish the person for not paying taxes. Charter Act of 1833. This act was the final step toward the centralization in British India. The features of this act were as follows. It made the Governor General of Bengal as the Governor General of India and vested in him all the civil and military power. Thus, the act created for the first time the Government of India having the authority over the entire territorial area possessed by the British in India. Lord William Bentinck was the first Governor General of India. Second, it deprived the Governor of Bombay and the Madras of their legislative power. The Governor General of India was given the exclusive legislative power for the entire British India. The law made under the previous acts were also called the regulations, while the law made under this act were called the acts. Third, it ended the activities of the East India Company as a commercial body, which became a purely administrative body. It provided that the company's territories in India were held by it in trust for His Majesty, his heirs and successors. Fourth, the Charter Act of 1833 attempted to introduce a system of open competition for the selection of civil services and stated that the Indians should not be debarred from holding any place, office and employment under a company. However, this provision was neglected after opposition from the Court of Directors. Charter Act of 1853. This was the last of the series of the Charter Act passed by the British Parliament between 1793 and 1853. It was a significant constitutional landmark. The features of this act were as follows. First, it separated for the first time the legislative and the executive functions of the Governor-General Council. It provided for the addition of 6 new members called the legislative councillors to the council. In other words, it established a separate Governor-General's Legislative Council which came to be known as the Indian Central Legislative Councils. This legislative wing of the council functioned as a mini parliament, adopting the same procedure as the British Parliament. Thus, legislation for the first time was treated as a special function of the government, requiring the special machinery and special process. It introduced an open competition system of the selection and recruitment of the civil servants. The convented civil services was thus thrown open to the Indian also. Accordingly, the Macaulay Committee, the Committee on the Indian Civil Services, was appointed in the 1854. Third, it extended the company's rule and allowed it to retain the possession of India territories on the trust for the British Crown, but it did not specify any particular period, unlike previous charter. This was clear indication that the company's rule could be terminated at any time in the Parliament liked. Fourth, it introduced for the first time local representation in the Indian Central Legislative Council. Of the 6 new legislative members of the Governor-General Council, 4 members were appointed by the local, that is provincial government of the Madras, Bombay, Bengal and Agra. The Crown Rule 1858 to 1947. Government of India Act of 1858. This significant act was enacted in the wake of the revolt of 1857, also known as the First War of Independence or the Sepoy Mutiny. The act was known as the Act for the Good Government of India, abolished the East India Company and transferred the power of the British territories and the revenues to the British Crown. The features of this act were as follows. First, it provided that India henceforth was to be governed by and in the name of Her Majesty. It changed the designation of the Governor-General of India to the Viceroy of India. He was the direct representative of the British Crown in India. Lord Canning thus became the first Viceroy of the India. Second, it ended the system of double government by abolishing the Board of Control and the Court of Directors. Third, it created a new office, Secretary of the State for India, vested with the complete authority and control over the Indian administrations. The Secretary of the State was a member of the British Cabinet and was responsible ultimately to the British Parliament. Fourth, it established a 15-member Council of India to assist the Secretary of State for India. The Council was an advisory body. The Secretary of State was made for Chairman of the Council. Fifth, it constituted the Secretary of the State in Council as a body corporate capable of suing and being sued in India and in England. The Act of 1858 was, however, largely confined to the improvement of the administrative machinery by which the Indian government was to be supervised and controlled in England. It did not alter any substantial way the system of government that prevailed in India. Indian Council Act of 1868. 1861. After the Great Revolt of 1857, the British government felt that necessity of seeking the corporation of the Indians in the administration of their country. In purchase of this, the policy of associations, three acts were enacted by the British Parliament in 1861, 1892 and 1909. The Indian Council Act of 1861 is an important landmark in the constitutional and political history of India. The features of this act were as follows. First, it made a beginning of the representative institutions by associating Indians with the law-making process. It thus provided that the Viceroy should be nominated some Indians as a non-official member of his expanded councils. In 1862, Lord Canning, then the Viceroy, nominated the three Indians to legislative councils, the Raja of Banaras, the Maharaja of Patiala and Sir Dinkar Rao. Second, it initiated the process of decentralization by restoring the legislative power to the Bombay and Madras presidencies. It thus reversed the centralizing tendency that started from the Regulating Act of 1773 and reached its climax under the Charter Act of 1833. This policy of legislative devolution resulted in the grant of the almost complete internal autonomy to the provinces in 1937. Third, it also provided for the establishment of the new legislative councils for Bengal, northwestern provinces and Punjab, which were established in 1862, 1886 and 1897 respectively. Fourth, it empowered the Viceroy to make rules and order for the more convenient transactions of business in the councils. It also gave a recognition in the portfolio system introduced by Lord Canning in the 1859. Under this, a member of the Viceroy councils was made in charge of one or more departments of the government and was authorized to issue final order on behalf of the council on matter of his departments. Fifth, it empowered the Viceroy to issue ordinances without the concurrence of legislative councils during emergency. The life of such coordinate was 6 months. Indian Councils of 1892. The future of this act were as follows. First, it increased the number of additional non-official members in the central and provincial legislative councils, but maintained the official majority in them. Second, it increased the functions of legislative councils and gave them power of discussing budget and addressing the questions to the executive. Third, it provided for the nomination of some non-official members, a central legislative council by the Viceroy on the recommendation of provincial legislative council and the Bengal Chamber of Commerce, and b. that of provincial legislative councils by the governor on the recommendation of the district board, municipalities, universities, trade associations, zamindars and chambers. The Act made a limited and the indirect provision for the use of elections in filling up some of the non-official seats both in central and provincial legislative councils. The word election was however not used in the Act. The process was described as in nominations made on the recommendations of certain bodies. Indian Councils Act of 1909. This act is also known as the Morley-Minto reforms. Lord Morley was the then Secretary of the State of India and Lord Minto was the then Viceroy of India. The features of this act were as follows. First, it considerably increased the size of the legislative councils, both central and provincial. The number of the members in the central legislative councils was raised from 16 to 60. The number of members in the provincial legislative councils was not uniform. Second, it retained official majority in the central legislative councils but allowed the provincial legislative councils to have the non-official majority. Third, it enlarged the deliberative functions of the legislative councils at both the levels. For example, members were allowed to ask supplementary questions, move resolutions on the budget, and so on. Fourth, it provided for the first time for the association of Indians with the executive councils of the Viceroy and the governors. Satyendra Prasad Sinha became the first Indian to join the Viceroy executive councils. He was appointed as the law member. Fifth, it introduced a system of communal representations for Muslims by accepting the concept of separate electorate. Under this, the Muslim members were to be elected only by the Muslim voters. Thus, the act legalized communalism, and the Lord Minto became known as the father of the communal electorate. Sixth, it also provided for the separate representations of the presidency, corporations, chambers of commerce, universities, and zamindar. Government Act of India, Government of India Act 1919. On the August 20, 1917, the British government declared for the first time that its objective was that gradual introductions of the responsible government of India. The Government of India Act of 1919 was thus enacted, which came into force in 1921. This act is also known as the Montagu Chelmsford reforms. Montagu was the Secretary of the State for India and Lord Chelmsford was the Viceroy of India. The feature of this act were as follows. First, it relaxed the central control over the provinces by the demarcating and separating the central and provincial subjects. The central and provincial legislatures were authorized to make the law on their respective list of subjects. However, the structure of government continued to be centralized and unitary. It further divided the provincial subjects into two parts, transferred and reserved. The transferred subjects were to be administered by the governor with the aid of ministers responsible to the legislative councils. The reserved subjects, on the other hand, were to be administered by the governor and his executive councils without being responsible to the legislative councils. This dual scheme of governance was known as the diarchy, a term derived from the Greek word diarchy, which means double rule. However, this experiment was largely unsuccessful. It introduced for the first time bicameralism and direct election in the country. Thus, the Indian legislature councils was replaced by a bicameral legislature consisting of an upper house, council of state, and a lower house, legislative assembly. The majority of members of both the houses were chosen by the direct elections. Fourth, it required that the 3 of the 6 members of the Viceroy executive councils other than the commander-in-chief were to be an Indian. Fifth, it extended the principle of communal representations by providing separate electorates for Sikhs, Indian Christians, Anglo-Indians, and Europeans. Sixth, it granted franchisee to a limited number of people on the basis of property, tax, or education. Seventh, it created a new office of High Commissioner for the India in London and transferred to him of the functions hitherto performed by the Secretary of the State of India. Eighth, it provided for the establishment of the Public Service Commissions. Hence, a Central Public Service Commissions was set up in 1926 for recruiting the civil servants. Ninth, it separated for the first time provincial budgets from the central budget and authorized the provincial legislatures to enact their budget. 10th, it provided for the appointment of the statutory commissions to inquiry into and report on its working after 10 years of coming into force. Simon Commission. In November 1927 itself, that is 2 years before the schedule, the British government announced that the appointment a 7-member statutory commissions under a chairmanship of Sir John Simon to report on the condition of India under its new constitution. All the members of the commissions were British and hence all the parties boycotted and the commission. The commission submitted its report in 1930 and recommended the abolition of the diarchy, extension of responsible government in the provinces, establishment of the Federation of the British India and princely states, continuism, constitutions of the communal electorate and so on. To consider the proposals of the commissions, the British government convened 3 round tables conference of the representatives of the British government, British Indian India and India princely states. On the basis of this discussion, white paper on the constitution reforms was prepared and submitted for the consideration of joint selected committee of the British Parliament. The recommendation of this committee was incorporated with certain changes in the next Government Act of India 1935. Communal Award. In August 1932, Ramsay MacDonald, the British Prime Minister, announced a scheme of representation of the minorities, which come to be known as the Communal Award. The award not only continued separate electorate for the Muslims, Sikhs, Indian Christians, Anglo-Indians and Europeans, but also extended it to the deprived classes, scheduled castes. Gandhiji was distressed over these extensions of the principle of communal representations to the deprived classes and undertook the fast unto the death in Yerawanda jail, Pune, to get the award modified. At last there was an agreement between the leaders of the Congress and the deprived classes. The agreement, known as the Pune Pact, retained the Hindu joint electorate and gave the reserved seat to the deprived classes. Government of India of 1935. The Act marked a second milestone towards a completely responsible government in India. It was a lengthy and detailed document having 321 sections and 10 schedules. The features of this act were as follows. It provided for the establishment of All India Federation consisting of the provinces and provincial states as units. The act divided in the power between the central and the units in terms of 3 lists: federal list for the central with 59 atoms, provincial list for the provinces with 54 atoms, and the concurrent list for both with the 36 atoms. Disorderly powers were given to the viceroy. However, the federation never come into being as the provincial states did not join it. Second, it abolished the diarchy in the provinces and introduced the provincial autonomy in its place. The provinces were allowed to act as autonomous units of administration in their defined spheres. Moreover, the Act introduced responsible government in the provinces, that is, the governor was required to act with the advice of the ministers responsible to the provincial legislature. This came into effect in 1937 and was discontinued to 1939. Third, it provided for the adoption of diarchy at the centre. Consequently, the federal subjects were divided into the reserved subjects and the transferred subjects. However, this provision of the Act did not come into the operation at all. Fourth, it introduced the bicameralism in 6 out of 11 provinces. Thus, the legislatures of Bengal, Bombay, Madras, Bihar, Assam, United Provinces were made bicameral, consisting of a legislative councils, upper house, and a legislative assembly, lower house. However, many restrictions were placed on them. Fifth, it further extended the principle of the communal representations by providing the separate electorates for the deprived classes, scheduled castes, and thus labor workers. Sixth, it abolished the Council of India established by the Government of India Act 1858. The Secretary States of India was provided with a team of advisors. Seventh, it extended franchise. About 10% of the total population got the voting right. Eighth, it provided for the establishment of the Reserve Bank of India to control the currency and the credit of the country. Ninth, it provided for the establishment not only of federal services, public services commissions, but also provincial public services commissions and joint public service commissions for two more provinces. 10th, it provided for the establishment of a federal court which was set up in 1937. Indian Independence Act of 1947. On February 20, 1947, the British Prime Minister Clement Attlee declared that the British rule in India would end by June 1948, after which the power would be transferred to the responsible Indian heads. This announcement was followed by the allegations by the Muslim League demanding the partition of the country. Again on June 3, 1947, the British government made it clear that any constitution framed by the Constituent Assembly of India formed in 1946 cannot apply to those parts of the country which were unwilling to accept it. On the same day, 3rd June 1947, Lord Mountbatten, the Viceroy of India, put forth the partition plan known as the Mountbatten Plan. The plan was accepted by the Congress and the Muslim League. Immediate effect was given to the plan by enacting the Indian Independence Act 1947. The feature of this act were as follows. First, it ended the British rule in India and declared the India as an independent and the sovereign state from the August 15, 1947. Second, it provided for the partition of India and created the up to independent dominion of India and Pakistan with a right to secede from the British Commonwealth. It abolished the office of Viceroy and provided for each dominion a Governor General who was to be appointed by the British King on the advice of the Dominion Cabinet. His Majesty government in the British was to have no responsibility with respect to the government of India or Pakistan. Fourth, it empowered the Constituent Assembly of the two dominions to frame and adopt any constitutions for their respective nations and repeal any act of the British Parliament, including the Independence Act itself. Fifth, it empowered the Constituent Assembly of the both the dominions to the legislature to legislate for their respective territories till a new constitutions were drafted and enforced. No acts of the British Parliament were passed after the 15th August 1947 was extended to either the new dominions unless it was extended thereto by a law legislated by the Dominion. Sixth, it abolished the office of the Secretary of the State of India and transferred his functions to the Secretary of State for Commonwealth Affairs. Seventh, it proclaimed the lapse of British paramountcy over the Indian Princess States treaty relations with the tribal areas from the August 15, 1947. Eighth, it guaranteed the freedom of the Indian princely states either to join the Dominion of the India or the Dominion of Pakistan or to remain independent. Ninth, it provided for the government of each of dominions and the provinces by the Government of India Act of 1935 till the new constitutions were framed. The dominion were however authorized to make modification in the act. 10th, it deprived the British monarch of his right to veto bill or ask the reservation of certain bills for re-approval, but this right was reserved for the Governor General. The Governor General would have a full power to assent any bill in the name of His Majesty. 11th, it designated the Governor General of the India and the provincial governors as a constitutional nominal head of the states. They were made to act on the advice of the respective councils of ministers in all matters. 12th, it drove the title of the Emperor of India from the royal titles of the King of England. 13th, it discontinued the appointment of civil services and reservations of the post by the Secretary of the States in India. The members of the civil services appointed before the 15th August 1947 would be continued to enjoy all the benefits that were entitled to till that time. At that stroke of midnight of 14-15 August 1947, the British rule came to an end and the power was transferred to the two new independent dominion of India and Pakistan. Lord Mountbatten became the first Governor General of new Dominion of India. He swore in Jawaharlal Nehru as the first Prime Minister of independent India. The Constituent Assembly of the India formed in 1946 became the Parliament of the Indian Dominion.